This one is going to be the path forward. So very excited about these 4 people that are up here today. We have Jared Summers, who's the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Defense Markets at LMI and the former CTO of the 18th Airborne Corps. Justin Finelli, the Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Navy. And Katie Sutton, the Chief Technology Advisor to the Commander and Director of Pentagon Operations. And the moderator, SecondFront's own Chief Technology Officer, Enrique Oti. Enrique, take it away.
Great, thank you, Sam. It's great to see so many people here at the end of the day, and I realize you're not here for us, you're here for the alcohol, so we will end this on time so everybody can get on with the important parts of the socialization. Great to have everybody on the panel. Something I do enjoy is the fact that everybody's job title says technology, and so that's really what I want us to talk about. It's like, what is that path forward with technology in the department? How do we look at warfighting? How do we look at that future? And so let's start off with what's going on right now. It's like Ukraine. It's been mentioned in multiple conversations already. I'm sure all of you are kind of checking out that environment, seeing what's going on. So in your respective areas, what are the lessons learned you're seeing when it comes to the technology on the battlefield? Like this kind of strange war, it's World War I era trench warfare with like modern era high-tech satellites and drones chasing people around the field. So what are you seeing as like those real disruptors that you're really focusing on, that you're really caring about?
So I think there's really 2 in the cyber domain. There's several big takeaways that we've seen, especially with cyber being an emerging domain, where we have a lot of opportunities to learn lessons going forward. The first is the importance of the speed of adoption. That being slow to adoption is, in many cases, going to be a significant disadvantage to those that are able to experiment and get new ideas, new techniques, new TTPs out quickly. I think the other big takeaway that we're seeing in the cyber domain from things like the conflict in Ukraine is the evolving nature of partnerships between the government and between private partner opportunities. Traditionally, that's been much more of a requirements-driven process, and I think now it needs to be something that, first of all, from a technology provider perspective, where it's a much more integrated process, that that industry understands what the operator needs are and can iterate that quickly into the flow. And then the other thing is just the changing nature of partnerships. It may not just be as simple as industry's job is to provide a tool, but in many cases, particularly in the cybersecurity domain, we saw the importance of cybersecurity providers helping Ukraine directly shore up based on some of their unique abilities to track adversary activity across the globe and really shore up Ukraine's cyber defenses to be quite effective in the early days of conflict.
Did anything surprise you in the cyber domain?
Well, that has actually been probably one of the most asked questions in cyber panels over the last 2 years. Why did we not see a massive cyber attack in the first few weeks of conflict? And so I think as a community, that was an unexpected result. And that really goes back to all of the hard work that was done across the government and the private sector to really raise the bar of cybersecurity before the first day of conflict. And that's a really important takeaway, is to have all of those relationships in place to be able to be effective, to then react at the speed of the domain.
Justin?
So I think she's pulling a little bit from the little time I've spent around folks in Congress. They say, if you don't have a plan ready when the door opens or the window opens, you've already lost it, right? And so the quote that's been on my mind recently is the nature of war doesn't change, but the character sometimes does. And it seems like this is one of those opportunities that if we're not really reflecting hard, I see a lot of patriots in this room. We know how fast these things go. We've known this for some time, but we don't waste crises, right? And so this is an opportunity to validate some of the points we already knew. Old school OODA loop, the process works, the speed doesn't. Katie already said it, the pace of ability to change, we're demonstrating, hey, this used to take 6 months. The necessity has driven this down to hours. Let's not let go of that. And so from a backslide perspective versus changing the way that we make decisions, it reminds me, I'll go technical, we'll go technology. In IT, you fail closed. In OT, in IT you fail open. In OT you fail closed. That's governance, right? Decision making is governance. What's happening over the last 2 years should change the way that we govern and the way that we make decisions, because if it doesn't, the cost per non-decision just got a lot more expensive. So we're paying attention to that from a technology perspective, but it needs to, and we all need to be mindful of how much that trickles down into our organizations, right? Like Ukraine is like urgency university, right? Like this has taught us that we should go faster. How do we encourage the rest of our organizations to see that? We've had opportunities to pilot, but can we scale them? That's what we're contending with right now.
Yeah, I think through my experience with the 18th Airborne Corps and our support to that conflict, a few things really resonate. One, earlier Sky brought up some great comments about our networks and the pipes and everything else. So when we really try to start accelerating that OODA loop and that decision advantage and leveraging near real-time or real-time data, the pipes do not support that. And so for even an operational 3-star JTF, like you're talking like dial-up speed. And with that, you're dragging, a massive dish and a couple 10K generators and everything else that gives off incredibly bespoke, high energy signals that in a battlefield like that is the first thing that's gonna get taken out. And so from our perspective, we don't wanna be anywhere near those unless we're just putting them up, as decoys or anything else. So that drives adopting technology faster. And that really works through the requirements in our process, because 5 years ago proliferated LEO wasn't really a thing, Starlink wasn't a thing, but now it is, and that completely changes the nature of the game when all of a sudden you can put up a Star Shield or a Chimera or something else and have the connectivity and have the speed to actually leverage the power of real-time data to make better decisions to save soldiers or warfighters' lives and be able to keep the opposition on their heels. I think the other is really around things that we take for granted when it's a whole of kind of nations approach. A great example, incredibly simple, is if you take 155 rounds that go in the M777s, which are an integral part of Ukraine's defense. Those are not standardized across all of the NATO nations. There are differences with each one of those, different charges, different rounds, but they're firing them through the same tubes. And so what that really means is how quickly can you recalibrate your fire control systems to account for differences in weight and size and others and charge patterns so you still hit the target you need. For us, historically, to get those certified and bought off and put in, I won't say how long that would take, it would take forever. The Ukrainians were doing that math and zeroing that in the matter of a day or two, because that's what it takes. And so our ability to work faster, to integrate faster, to enable us to achieve effects really needs to change if we want to be successful going forward in the modern battlefield.
I want to play off of that for a second. You talk about like the speed at which they're adapting downrange. And what you're kind of really seeing out of the conflict is there's this balance between speed and scale. The Ukrainians are able to go fast, but you're not seeing it adopted across their armed forces. You get at battalion level. And so when you look at the US military and our need for scale in addition to speed, let's talk about the Valley of Death, but not as we've talked about before, like not about commercial companies crossing the Valley of Death. There are great ideas coming from Soldier, Sailor, Airmen, Marines, Guardians, I always forget those ones. Great ideas coming from internal to the DoD. There's great stuff coming out of DARPA, great stuff coming out of the labs. How do we get those ideas across the Valley of Death into production, into operations, and actually changing the war fights? I know all of you have dealt with the R&D community, so go start.
Before we get into Constellation and how butt-kicking that is at Cybercom, the way that we're thinking about this right now is we want it to be, when we pilot something, when we try something out at small scale, we want it to be too good to ignore. And we want to tip that point by showing benchmark data. So when we do exercises or when we do real life, we always want to compare, here's what it was and here's what it is now. Because again, to get this past the 15% of the organization who gets it, who feels the urgency to everybody else, we need data and a story. And so what we've done within Department of Navy is we have an innovation adoption kit to say, let's put in the hands of innovation at the edge folks a storyboard and data for making the case that you can divest, get rid of something, kill it dead in terms of an old program of record or an old function, and reutilize that money so that we can scale the best things up right now. It has to be not close. 15% doesn't get it done. It has to be twice as good. In most cases, what we're seeing is it's not twice as good, it's 3 times as good, it's 10 times as good. But we need that integration and that hustler at the edge to tell the story. We won't do one unless an operator's involved.
Do you have an example?
Sure. Like at the most technical level, one of the things that we've been doing is proliferated low Earth orbit on ships. And so we have MilCon, and then we said, hey, this new thing, AppFit, out of Congress, out of the HACD, is an opportunity to scale faster. So we were doing onesies, twosies. We did multiple dozens in a hurry with new money. Now there are places where we have PLEO in rough waters where the existing antennas and MilSat weren't working. And so the idea of having connectivity, we use Flow 3, so in some cases it's getting back to the internet where we have cases and use cases where that's necessary. I got videoed the other day from the CVN 72 underway during an exercise to just talk through regular stuff. It's changing the way that they operate.
So really excited that the term constellation came up. I know this is something that I could probably use the rest of our time panel talking about because it's something I've been really excited about for a few years. So when we think about how to harness new technologies and new concepts that are coming from particularly the S&T community in the department, where the department invests significant resources in looking at what capabilities and technologies are going to have the potential to impact what the future warfighter needs. There have been, the last decade we've spent talking about the Valley of Death, and most of those conversations have focused on hardware-based systems, where there's a need to do the S&T activity, then there's a budgeting activity where they come up with the funds to do some sort of prototype to then be ready to go into a program of record. Very lengthy process. Fortunately, software and the department moving to software acquisition pathways offers a great opportunity to be able to shorten that process. And so the United States Cyber Command and DARPA have been in a partnership agreement for the last few years. We just, a few weeks ago, signed a memorandum of agreement between the two to form what we call the process that's going to allow us to continually bring capabilities from DARPA to the command. So instead of, the analogy that I've been using often is instead of building a one-way bridge from each DARPA program to each program at Cyber Command, we're building a bi-directional, multi-lane highway that's going to allow us to continue to bring a flow of technologies, not necessarily a one-to-one mapping, but to be able to look across the entire DARPA portfolio and identify which of those elements are going to be the most important, and then spend the time to experiment. Once it's made it out of its S&T phase, spend time with bringing our operational users to the science and technology community and give them an opportunity to actually experiment with it and mature it to the point where it could flow into a program of record. And we're doing that by using common development environments and aligning the program increment sprints of our agile process of our program of records to identify opportunities to get some of these technologies into that flow to get that operational experience. It's still a very new partnership that we are just kicking off. Looking forward to the innovation community finding ways to harness into that DARPA model. And then the command is really looking at using this as our model for how we would harness innovation across all of the government labs and industry as well going forward once we prove out this process. And I think it's definitely a model that could be scaled across the department, looking at some of those nurturing functions that are in place by this sort of multi-lane superhighway. We're putting a lot of deliberate thought into how do we make this repeatable? How do we look at this from a technology perspective, a budgeting perspective, an acquisition perspective so that we don't have to recreate the wheel each time, and we can create that nurtured pipeline to bring the capability through. And then to bring our operational users in to be able to experiment and give that guidance that oftentimes the S&T community doesn't get. They sort of think they understand what an operator will use, but actually having real life operators provide that input, it gets to a product that is more likely to transition and actually be used by the warfighter rather than just be a tool or an algorithm that's in their toolbox that never gets used.
Yeah, I can't stress the importance of that enough. Having an operational user involved early and often, and not just a once a year soldier touch point for an Army example, or once every 2 years stopping by for an hour and saying, do you like my widget? Particularly when we're talking about software digital capabilities. One, it's never done, you just don't throw it over the wall. It's gonna continuously evolve and adapt and change over time as the needs change, the operational environment changes, and everything else. The problem is on the user side, they have the great ideas, they don't have the authorities, and sometimes they don't have the space or the time to really mature them. And on the S&T side, in many cases, they have no access to actual operational users. So you have two folks that inherently are trying to do the right thing and want to do the right thing, but they need each other to actually be successful. And so driving those partnerships where they're literally attached to the hip, iterating in real time together is how this becomes powerful and how this becomes real. Otherwise, an individual comes up with a great idea, they throw it over the wall, look at my beautiful thing, and the operators just stand there and look at it like, what am I supposed to do with this? This is never gonna work. And I've seen that, unfortunately, over and over again. The good news is, the folks want to help, and they want to do the right thing. And it's building those bridges. I love the highway analogy of, breaking down those barriers and enabling that collaboration to happen, because that's where awesome things, are possible.
On that real quick.
Yeah.
So for dual use, like where it doesn't necessarily take like quite as much refinement, you still want the operators involved, but like that pairs really well with the business case. This is the shitty part. Like the user part it's awesome because you're around them and they're inspiring you and you're getting feedback, you're making your product better. The other piece is, what are you turning off? Because we have like no additional dollars for like being more cybery, but like if we can divest something and increase resilience at the same time, like we want that, and you have to then bully us with that operational user that says, I want this and money's not an excuse. Those paired together can make it stick.
Jared, I want to dive in a little bit. So you've been on both sides of the aisle. You're in, now you're on the commercial side. So when I was on active duty, I thought, hey, I'm really changing stuff, We're changing the way we work with the industry as a DIU, as in a program office. And it wasn't until I got out that I realized it still sucked for the commercial side, because I'm on the commercial side trying to work with the government going, oh, those processes actually still are not great. So now that you've been on the inside, you're in that role where you're engaging with industry, engaging with technology, now you're on the commercial side, what would you change? What would you tell yourself about what you should do? Like, you talk about this soldier engagement, how do you actually try to make that better from what you've seen?
Yeah, I think I would have been incredibly more effective in my government CTO role knowing a lot of what I know now. And a lot of that, stems from just the process by which, you have to align the requirement with the funding, with someone who has the authorities and a vehicle, and everyone in this room probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. Getting all of those things just perfectly to align, to actually, bring something to bear. From the user side, luckily we had, with Ukraine and our support to that theater and everything else, had a very loud bullhorn that I was able to scream and to create noise and to educate and to explain. And so we were able to find people to help, but then I still couldn't understand always why we couldn't move faster, or what else did we need to do. Like, what do you mean? You've got the money, I've got the need, we've got the requirement, like what else is missing? But then it's that last piece, it's either a vehicle piece or it's something else. And so really understanding how all of those things come together is critical. But then I also, find that there's an educational component on the DoD side that is incredibly important as we're fundamentally, changing what we're asking for and how we're trying to operate. We take for granted, particularly on the commercial side or folks that have been in tech, for a while, we take for granted the fact that everyone, knows what a DSO is or, understands, the difference between, AI and ML and all these nuances. But unfortunately, not everyone does. And so, or even just understanding, what is possible with data, how you use data, why it's important, to have clean data and actually put things into the system the correct way the first time. We take for granted all of those things, particularly if you've been in industry. And so there's an educational component that has to happen first, that you have to high grade that base level of knowledge with everyone that's involved, particularly in the command and others, that once you do that, these things become a lot easier, because then we have a shared common understanding, a shared common vernacular by which we're talking, and it helps everyone collectively push in the right direction.
All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and we were joking before the panel started about like you can play a drinking game every time someone says AI, so get your glasses ready, you're about to use it a lot. As we look at the future of tech, and we look at the future of warfighting, obviously everybody says AI is disruptive. I would love to hear from your perspective some specifics on, within your technical domains, where are you seeing the biggest opportunities for AI disruption? Like, where is it applied in your existing tech stack with some new capabilities? Where are you seeing the biggest chance for disruption? Justin, start with you.
Yeah, you shouldn't start with me on this one, because not enough places. So here's the problem, right? Like, we need that common foundation. We need time to shrink doing the foundational activities so that we can spend more on target. So like we've seen in back office functions that AI happens to be the technology that's getting us places. We're using it for help desk. We're using it for some ATR, target recognition. Like those are useful for us. For this to promulgate, we need to be better at the data piece. And what I'd like to say about that is I'll advocate for Advana from a joint perspective has been super useful. When we all do our own things or have these separate pockets and we're not leveraging, we're all doing common things. It sometimes feels like paired playing, like is I think what they call it for kids, where like you sit next to each other and like they're not interacting, but they're not lonely. Like if we're actually using each other's stuff and starting on second base, that's when we get more opportunity for AI stuff. We went to visit AI2C at the Army recently and learned a ton from them. Like if we're not asking people who are better at this than stuff, like including industry, and if you're talking to a listener, like it doesn't matter where the ideas are coming from. So like from a translation perspective, I think AI can help a lot of places. We are going to pick it where it is asymmetrically helpful. And so rather than specify here is where we need AI, we're coming with here are our big problems, here's where technologies associated with AI have helped. It's about the outcomes. How do you measure whether AI is working? Outcomes. How do you measure whether culture is changing? Outcomes. Like that's it.
So I'll start with the journey that Cyber Command has been on over the last few years. So in response to a congressionally tasked study, we spent last year developing our 5-year AI roadmap. Really a very deep technical dive looking at across our entire mission space, where were we going to get advantage and outcomes by potentially applying AI. And it was a really comprehensive look at all the different places that technology would apply, and at the end I can give particularly a couple examples. But as we went through that, we got to a very similar places to what Justin talked about, which was there is so much opportunity, basically every single aspect of our mission, given that we are the cyber domain, everything is zeros and ones and is therefore data that could be processed. is going to be impacted by this technology. So how do we put ourselves in a position to be able to do that at scope and scale? And so as an outcome from the roadmap, which really looked at a wide range of technologies, some might be more mature, very COTS that we could look at leveraging soon. Some are hypotheses of where algorithms might be able to have an impact, and everywhere in between. How are we going to be postured to be able to do that and bring that in at a scope and scale? And what we also looked at is there is quite a bit of adoption happening across our cyber operations forces, but it's often in pockets by some innovative person working in a way, and then they'll run into a barrier. They don't have access to the right data. There's a policy issue. There's concern about, we always need to think about, are we going to use AI responsibly, and are we going to use it in a way that we understand what we're getting, that we're not getting hallucinations, or that there's not drift of the models, and that we're getting an outcome that we can rely on, and that our users are trained appropriately. So what we're working on over the next few years is building that foundation within the command. How do we get the training so that our workforce understands the technology and be able to not just have a few pockets of people that understand where it might apply and experiment, but how do we get that across our whole community and build the culture? How do we get understanding of the people that can help shape policy to be able to identify the roadblocks? And then how do we really think about data, particularly across the entire Department of Defense, the DoDN being the third largest network in the world? How do we get data standards and the right data strategy so that we have the data we need to be able to move quickly? And so we're looking at how we build all those foundations and enabling it in a cyclical process by doing some very tactical, very prioritized pilots of where we think we can learn and identify where we're going to hit some of these barriers and get the reps and sets of figuring out how we overcome those and get to broader adoption. And I think one of the lowest hanging fruit technologies to look at is really looking at cybersecurity data. Anybody that's been in an operations center knows all of the alerts, there's a wide number of tools being used across the DoDN which provide tremendous amount of information. That is a lot for a human being to analyze. And so how do we use AI and machine learning to ingest all that data and really find what's important to be able to protect and defend our networks against the wide variety of adversaries that we see on a daily basis? It's also one of the areas where cybersecurity is really well suited for application of AI because we have that data that generates every day based on the continuous adversary activity that we see both from nation states but also hacktivists and non-state actors, that there's a significant amount of training data out there if we collect and mature it in the right way. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to move forward with that.
Doubling down on that just for 10 seconds. The idea of zero trust, right? So ZTPFMO within the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office within DoD said we all have 91 threshold and 152 objective, right? That's going to be hard to do by 2027. And so where we can use artificial intelligence to help that and then also divest along the way is a super focused area within cybersecurity where we can all leverage each other if we're smart. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it can literally be used everywhere and anywhere, and it just really boils down to what is the value derived and what's the outcome that it unlocks that helps us achieve our operational or strategic goals. The fact of the matter is there's a few. One, back to the training, the education, a lot of times folks be like, well, just put some AI on it, or just let's get an algorithm and this is all going to go away. The fact of the matter is a lot of organizations today just are not ready, not just from a training or understanding perspective, but from data availability, data cleanliness, but then also if you just drop artificial intelligence on top of a broken, probably manually intensive process, it's not going to be a whole lot better because folks are still going to do things locally on their desktop or pop back off because this isn't connected to that. So it's incredibly important to really understand from the user's perspective the outcome that you're trying to achieve, the problem that you're trying to solve, and look at that entire workflow holistically, because just dropping it here and dropping it there isn't really going to help anything in the end. You're going to spend a lot of time, probably a lot of money, and you're not going to get the benefit you're looking for. And that is incredibly worrisome, particularly where we are in the adoption curve, because there's folks out there looking for any reason to say no, or be like, look, that money we spent over there, we didn't get anything from that, from the naysayers that are still within our organization. So don't give them that excuse. Just ensure that you're really driving after a highly clear, outcome-based, focused on the user and the problem you're trying to solve, and that is the best place to start.
So Katie, Jared, you both brought up the education piece, the training piece, the culture piece here. So Katie, specifically for you, Congress has given a ton of authorities for hiring within the cyber career fields. What's your thoughts on those authorities? Are you guys taking advantage of them? Like, what is that looking like right now? Has that been able to change how you're looking at the right talent, the right culture?
So we are. I think we're looking at talent from a couple ways. Especially in the cyber field, having that deep technical expertise is going to be really important for us to move forward. And we're certainly never going to have a monopoly of that in the government or within Cyber Command. And we're a relatively small force compared to other combatant commands and compared to other forces. So really having the right skill level is going to be important. So looking at opportunities for our for training in our force, but one of the things we're most excited about at the command is some of those new hiring authorities that we've just gotten from Congress in the recent years and have just started hiring to be able to bring in, for short periods of time, on the order of several years, bring in people from industry, top experts at a competitive pay, to let them come in and help us with these technical problems, immerse themselves for a few years, contribute to our really hard problems and things that you're not going to be able to solve anywhere else, and see that impact and be able to have real life impact to the warfighter and to all of the challenges that we have going on today. And really looking forward, we've started bringing our first few in, and just really excited about what that can bring and looking forward to seeing the pipeline. So for those of you that have considered going to government and said, wow, but I think that's going to be a really small fraction of your salary, this will at least make it a little bit more competitive to be able to give you an opportunity to come for a few years. And I think we see a lot of benefit of people, of getting that flow between industry and the command, getting people to understand our problems, bringing in new ideas and new technology, and then having them go back out and be able to help us in the industry. I talk a lot about the cyber innovation ecosystem. It's sort of a term I use a lot in my daily time at work, because it is going to take a village to be able to get the right technology and have the enduring advantage we need. It's going to have to come from within government and all of the government agencies we talked about, and within academia and within private sector, all levels of maturity of company. In many of these emerging technologies, we're no longer in the world of 5 or 6 large defense prime contractors with their subcontractors. There is just a massive amount of innovation out in small business. How we harness that is going to be really critical to our success going forward, and a priority for the command.
So I'll double down on that. I'm not smart enough to come through one of the authorities she just talked about, but there are a lot of others, highly qualified experts, and the services the department have, multiple different levers. I took advantage of that for a couple years when I was a CTO of the 18th. I can't speak highly enough about it. Solving really hard problems, getting experience you won't see anywhere else. But then the importance of, for the couple of years, to then bounce back into industry, because industry moves so much faster than even the fastest moving government organization can. So for example, over the last 18 months that I've been at LMI, the amount of exposure and energy that we put in to LLMs and generative AI, and the investments that we're making, and the knowledge that I've gained from our team and our LMI Labs folks is just astronomical that I never would have gotten on the other side. But that's now knowledge and experience that I have. So at some point when I make a decision to come back in government, all of those additional skills that I've earned back on and learned back in the commercial side, I can bring to bear to continue to help drive the mission on the government side. So that rotation of in and out is incredibly healthy. It brings energy, it brings knowledge, but more importantly, it brings someone that is willing to be like, that's not the way this should work. There's a much better way to do this, and to just help push and to start helping the organization grow. So those authorities and those options are awesome, and I applaud everyone that is using them to their fullest extent because they help.
Who wishes the government made better buying decisions? So specifically DoD. We see hands? Okay, I have questions for people who don't have their hands raised. We need good buyers to make better buying decisions. This is a talent thing, right? And so the idea of dual use citizens, if people come in for 2 years, it makes a difference. The selections aren't happening at the 4-star level. They're happening at the GS13 source selection level, right? And so, when you come to me, for instance, and say, hey, we have this better stuff, I'm like, I'll bet you do. Let's do it. Show me divestments. Let's talk at 10:30 p.m. and try to frame something up. But the idea of someone who can push that through, we have pockets. We know the people who can get that stuff done. We just need more of them. And I'm not saying we need more employees. We need to activate a higher population, and we need some of that good blood who can make that happen. It's just really important.
Okay, in the last few minutes, I want to ask you kind of a futurist question. It's come up a couple times today, the idea of a Manhattan Project. And you hear this a lot of time, we need another Manhattan Project. So what made the Manhattan Project work was a mixture of industry, academia, a lot of academia, but a hard problem to solve that hasn't been solved. This is very different than innovation. This is very different than rapid prototyping. This is deep, hard tech. What's interesting is Manhattan Project was eclipsed a few years later in both size of people and money by the SAGE program, which was the anti-ballistic missile system of how we track ballistic missiles. New radars, new processors, new operating systems, new programming languages all came out of that program, and it totally dwarfed the Manhattan Project. So what's next? What is the hard problem that is not solved now that you think we need another Manhattan Project for to actually get at it, to maintain our competitive advantage, primarily against, I'll say, China? And Jared, I'm going to start with you.
Wow. Okay. So this wasn't a question for the record that we prepped ahead of time.
No, it was not.
So we're getting this one cold.
Exactly.
Thanks. Appreciate it. And I get to go first. So there's a few. I think one is really in the space domain. We talk about logistics resupply. We talk about maintenance. When it comes to ground-based or air-based assets. Really focusing on what that means for the growing constellation. In outer space, being able to refuel more efficiently, being able to launch quicker, being able to repair things in orbit if someone were to do something to them, staying ahead of that capability to do that much faster, while some of that dual use, and a lot of folks have leaned in to make launches more economical, more repeatable, a lot quicker. The capability to fundamentally, operate in that domain is still relatively immature, but its importance cannot be understated for the future of everything that we need to do. It is the ultimate high ground, and if you don't control it and can't operate in it in the way that we need to, everything else falls apart. And so if I were to invest a few dollars, that would be a worthy investment.
Katie?
So I feel like I have a little bit of an unfair advantage given that I spent the first 15 years of my career at San Diego National Labs, which was one of the organizations that was fundamental to the Manhattan Project. But given that, I'm actually going to answer and say I don't think another Manhattan Project is really what the country needs. At the time, there was a single, very focused technology that was needed on a certain timeline that was important. going forward, I think our challenge where we're going to struggle, especially in the national security side, is the number of new technologies that are coming at us that we need to think about and understand how it might impact us. So we've talked a lot about AI. That's one of the biggest things talked about in any tech panel. But there's another handful of emerging technologies. Synthetic biology. How is that going to affect the Department of Defense to be able to, for example, there was a DARPA program a few years ago that demonstrated the ability to literally grow a runway using biology to be able to, in short term, be able to land helicopters on a dust field that you couldn't otherwise have done. So all of the applications across that, all of the applications of cybersecurity, hypersonic, space, it's not necessarily one technology that we need to be able to invest in and do one big push. We need to adopt a culture of innovation and being able to think outside the box and be able to quickly identify where technologies are going to have an impact to our mission and be able to harness those and also be able to prioritize, because ultimately there's finite number of resources. I've heard Justin mention divesting a lot, but that's an important part as well. And I think that's going to be the biggest enabler for us to be able to identify what's important, what we need to look at, and be able to address the breadth of those technologies versus saying we need one Manhattan project for this specific technology and the specific application. It's actually much harder to do that at a breadth than just to pick a single problem and go all in on it. And so I think the department's going to have to figure out how to use our resources to apply AI across all of our missions, to adopt UAVs, to be able to look at synthetic biology, to figure out how we're going to have advantage in space, and be able to do all those at the same time. That's, I think, the Manhattan problem of the future.
I like that. So winning the AI model race is important. It matters a lot, the K-curve internationally. Quantum matters a ton and is hard, and you don't want to be on the losing end of that. Space, same, but we're in the portfolio phase of our lives, right? And so if we're not opportunistic and looking at where we're getting the most asymmetric benefits, then we're doing it wrong and we're probably banking incorrectly. So the idea of doubling down on what you've already done, this thing's called offset, right? That's a hedge. The hedge has grown. Like, you guys have grown this, right? It's not like a hedge that was like a Parcheesi piece anymore. Like, it's up there. If we make this the main thing or a higher percentage of the main thing and it can stay, the meta answer is making data-driven decisions the right way to do this. We have horizons to do tech scanning and scouting. We can pull the right things across. We have outcome-driven metrics to prioritize based on actual mission outcome, not, I know routers, so we're going to buy more routers. That's stupid. The idea of using dual use and not letting us say no, giving us data to tell us which are the right mission outcomes to go after because that's there, and giving us data to say, and I like Guy's point, hey, this is a policy, it's provably stupid. Show us the data on that so that we can go after those and really focus. The way that you do this, I think, is you don't spend time on solved problems. It takes all the brain power in this room and more to solve a hard problem like that. We have to lean in. The more time we're like, hey, I think I can make this 2% better. That's not tipping point thinking. So leaning in together, leveraging something that's imperfect, that's what we learned in Ukraine. That's what we've learned here.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we're going to end 1 minute early, which is amazing. So thank you very much. It was great to have you guys here and love to hear your insights. Thanks.
Bars open.